and your life.
Well, good evening and welcome, everyone. Thank you all for coming back, and appreciate you all being here for our first meeting of 2021 of the Chiefs Advisory Committee. I know that we have a lot on the agenda, as we seem to each and every time we get together. So I don't want to take up too much further time with intro, but I just want to thank everybody. Hopefully, everybody had a good long stretch of holidays and time with family since we last met. But thank you all for coming again together again today, and I will turn it over to our co-chairs, Judge Maynard and Miss Asmeri Haq. Thank you.
All right. Well, thank you, Chief. I also want to say welcome back to all, and New Year's well wishes to each one of you. It seems like so much longer than just a month since we last met as a committee. And certainly there have been things that occurred nationally and on a statewide basis in the areas of police and community relations and/or social and racial justice, a lot of which we could not characterize as positive. But perhaps in this last week, with the celebration of another MLK holiday, which is always a time for reflection, hope, and commitment to higher ideals, and the rollout of phase 1B of the corona vaccine, and yesterday's successful transfer of power nationally from one administration to a new one, we have turned a positive corner on what could be ahead of us for the remainder of 2021. And it's on that note of optimism, if you will, that I want to thank each of you for coming back to help in the important work of trying to build bridges and better relationships between our Dublin Police Department and the diverse population and diverse communities within the city that the department endeavors to effectively and equitably serve and protect. Want to give a special thanks to the chief for his continued willingness to be available to we, the committee. Thank you to Rebecca Myers and Asmeri Haq for their work on putting together tonight's meeting and agenda. And a special thank you to Becky Metcalf, who continues to be patient with me and who has prepared the minutes that were recently amended and are now available for the committee's review and consideration. We'll move into new business. We'll move into the attendance taking at this point in the meeting. And Chief, if you could help not only with the attendance of the community partners who are here, but also those members of the department who are also part of tonight's meeting and call.
I certainly can. Thank you, Judge. I appreciate that. So for the committee members, I'll go through the list of members, and as you're present, please signify so that we can record for the record. Judge Maynard, obviously.
Here. Yes.
Co-chair Asmeri Haq.
Here.
Mr. Cameron Justice.
Here.
Miss Yenling Yin.
Here.
Miss Susan Ortega.
Here.
Mr. Imran Malik.
Here, present.
Mr. Isao Shoji.
Here.
And I do believe, for the record, Cherie has emailed us. He intends on joining the meeting a little later this evening. And also, we have heard from Miss Ingram and Miss Villalba, who will not be able to attend the meeting tonight. But that is the role from the committee, Judge.
All right. Thank you, Chief.
And Just introducing briefly the members from the police department who are here with us today. I obviously and the bureau commanders are all present for the meeting again this evening. In addition, we have some members from the organization who are identified to the task force on regular basis. Corporal Devin Howard.
Good afternoon, everyone.
Good afternoon, Corporal.
And then Officer Amber McCloskey is working this evening. Unfortunately, she was pulled away to a call. My hope is that she will be able to join us later in the meeting as well. And then we have school resource officers who have come back to us for this conversation again tonight about our school resource officer program. So it's my pleasure to introduce Officer Rigoberto Quintanilla.
Good evening.
Good evening.
And I believe Officer Nimmo is coming back with us tonight as well, although he will be joining the meeting a little later in the agenda as well. Lieutenant Tabernick, am I missing anyone else who is going to be joining us tonight?
Yes, sir. Officer Paul Burks is having some technical difficulties, so hopefully he can get online here shortly.
Thank you, sir. And for the group, I just wanted to let you know Sergeant Rice and Corporal Morris, who were with us in the last meeting and discussion, are unfortunately unable to attend tonight. Just had some circumstance that changed their schedule a little bit. So I do apologize for that. We thought we would be able to get everybody there. And much like everything we experienced in 2020, still working through trying to reconcile and get everybody to the same location at the same time. But I have faith we've got enough members present to be able to have a full, thorough discussion and to be able to answer any questions or take in any information the committee has for us tonight. So thank you very much, sir.
All right, great. Thank you. Next part of business that we have to take care of is the review and hopefully adoption of last month's minutes. And that was sent out. If you guys want to take a few minutes to review them. Again, I would say that Becky Metcalf and I did do quite a bit of review of the minutes, and I would represent to you all that they read well, and that if anybody wants to look back over them, they shouldn't have any problem following how our December 2020 meeting went. And at any point, if anyone wants to make a motion to accept or adopt the minutes as they've been amended, I would entertain that motion.
I move to accept and adopt the minutes as they have been amended.
Thank
I
you.
second that.
A second.
There were a lot of seconds out there, folks. Who's recording? Rebecca, are you recording, or is Becky recording?
Judge, on our end, Miss Metcalf is recording.
Okay. We would go with Ajmiri as the person that moved, and I think it would be Imran that second. Any discussion that anyone want to have? All in favor then of accepting the December minutes as amended signify by a yes or an by yes or a, and anybody who is not in favor by a nay. So all in favor?
Yes.
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 Thank you. Any nays out there? No nays. Thank you. We would move then into any old business. Any old business that we need to follow up on from our December 2020 meeting? Rebecca, anything that you have of note that we need to follow up on at this point?
No, I think I just made a note in our last in my last email about the new pages. There was just a few tweaks from our communications team, so you can view the community task force, or you can review the Chiefs Advisory Committee meetings while they're live on those pages that I sent. But other than that, no. Thank you, Judge.
All right, thank you. And then we will come back to any correspondence from the community later on in the agenda, correct?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. We're gonna move into what would be new business, and part one of new business I have would be any update that Esau would have to share from the task force, which he also serves on. So Esau, any update that you would like to provide to the Chiefs Advisory Committee?
Yes, sir. Not too many things. I unfortunately was not able to attend the last task force meeting, but I did get caught up on some things that did happen in the meeting. Probably the most pertinent tonight is the fact that the task force moved to approve a statement regarding the recent event, since the task force meeting happened really just after the insurrection, or however you want to characterize it, that happened in the Capitol. So there is a statement that task force approved, which I believe is on the website if one was looking for. Took a lot of discussion from my understanding, because people have different perspectives on how such a statement should be constructed, but ultimately they did agree on one, and was passed on to the City Council. Other than that, the subcommittee level work continues, and I can certainly speak for the committee that I am on, which is the Economics and Infrastructure. We have had one formal meeting and some official discussions to prepare for those formal meetings, just for the purpose of figuring out the focus of what the subcommittee work should be. The intention is that, I believe, the chair has asked for subcommittees to wrap up their work by end of March, so that by April there will be some report to be made to the City Council at the full task force, at least a preliminary recommendation or report, rather. That is all I have tonight.
All right. Well, that was plenty. So the task force is attempting to have a report ready for an April City Council meeting.
I should not say a report, if you will, like not the final recommendation, but just sort of an update as to where they stand. That is the better way to characterize that.
Okay, great. I have a few questions, but I'll wait to hear if any of the other committee members have any questions that they want to ask Esau about the work of the task force. Okay. Esau, do you know when the task force is scheduled to meet again?
Quick answer is no, not off the top of my head. It will be probably the second week of February, but I am not 100% sure.
All right. Well, when that committee meets again, please pass on well wishes to the committee chairs from the Chiefs Advisory Committee, and let them know that we are available and willing to interact, correspond with them if they ever desire.
Absolutely, I will do that.
All right. Thank you. At this point, I think what we would like to do is pause on the new business because there's a desire to have a discussion about what we are calling current events that have happened since the last time that we met. And I believe that it would be better if we went ahead at this point and had the chief's update to the committee and then return to new business before going into continued discussion with the issues that the SROs are here to address with us. If that would be okay, Chief.
Absolutely, Judge, and thank you for giving me some space again to update the committee on some progress and ongoings here from our end at the police department we would like you to be aware of and to share with you. So I have a number of bullet points here, and I will do my best to work through them expeditiously because I know there is a desire to get into conversation as you mentioned about current events, and also we want to return to that discussion about the school resource officer. So I will do my best to keep it succinct. So as far as policy updates, which we sort of kept as a floating bullet point, I just wanted to have a space to come back to those areas of policy. And as we've talked in the past, we are constantly looking and evaluating our policy to make sure, again, as I've offered previously, that we are not just operating based on past practice, but best practices. And so we continue, and the one I wanted to just bring to the table, and we mentioned it briefly last meeting, and we're still, frankly, in progress, but very, very close to finalizing the amendments and updates to our officer-involved critical incident policy. So we had some discussion. Lieutenant Tabernick has done some fantastic work over the last several months, meeting with officers internally, meeting with external entities as well to help inform our drafting of that policy and our amendment of that policy. And the most recent conversation we had was with our labor team here within the department to get some more feedback from the officer's perspective on the policy before we finalize it and put that into place. So we had that discussion probably about a week or so ago. We are very, very close to finalizing it. And our hope and intention is to finalize it at the very least by the end of the month. And I would love to make sure we to get a chance to send that out to you so you get a chance to look at it as we put that in place. To be clear, we do have a policy currently on officer-involved incidents, but this is our effort in really taking a look, as I'm certain we will get into discussion later in the meeting, at current events. And how that has helped informed our considerations and discussions and dialogue internally about and reflections on what our policy looks like currently and what we want it to be in the future. And certainly we want that to be something that we get a chance to talk with this group about, so there is clarity on exactly what our policy will be moving forward, always with the understanding that we're ready to adapt when we need to again move into best practices as those develop in the future. So that was the quick update on policies. The next couple of bullets, I just want to make sure that as we move into a new calendar year, we get a chance to take a look at two things. One, a reflection of how we performed and how we tracked as far as our metrics on a couple of our goals for last year, and share that with the members of the group on what our specific progress looked like. And then talk about what our goals look like moving into this year as well in 2021. So if Lieutenant Tabernick can bring up, I just have a couple of quick slides. Just as a reminder, we just want to walk through what our goals were for 2020, which we covered in our first meeting together. But I'll quickly hit those, and then we'll talk a little bit about some of the metrics and where we ended up landing in recorded incidents in a couple of categories over the last year, and some information we wanted to make sure we shared with you tonight. So just briefly, our goals, four major goals here at the police department, all of which are intentionally designed to support our mission, which in brief, again, is protection, service, and public safety in partnership with members of our community. So those four key goals for our organization are critical incident response and preparedness, theft offense reduction throughout the city, overall traffic safety improvement, and addressing issues of significant community concern. For two of those goals, our tracking primarily is output driven. So when we talk about critical incident response and preparedness and addressing issues of significant community concern, those are not as metrically driven as the other two, but those are still goals that we record our progress over the course of the year in actions we have taken and a great example, probably the best example for this group, is in Goal 4, addressing issues of significant community concern. One of the highlights for us last year that we are very proud to have been part of and to have partnered in the community with is the development of the Chiefs Advisory Committee. So those goals really, again, are output driven. The two that are outcome driven, that we're tracking metrics throughout the year to assess how well we are performing in achieving those goals of reducing overall crime in the community and improving traffic safety, are the ones that I wanted to share, at the very least, the numbers with you, so you have an awareness of what that looked like over the course of the calendar year in 2020. So if we can move to the next slide, Lieutenant. So I'm sorry, it's a little small here on these graphs, but I have them in front of me, and I'll cover the numbers. So far in 2020, but this is actually where we ended up at the end of the year. We sort of updated a slide we used and presented for the Homeowners Association back in October. Theft from vehicles is the #1 offense we have reported by category for the city of Dublin traditionally. Theft overall is the #1 crime we have reported, and within that subcategory, we focused on theft from vehicles because that's the number we see the most of each year. And our goal each year is to try to reduce the overall occurrences and benchmarked against our previous year's activity. The other metric that we track within the category of theft are the combined category of burglary and breaking and entering offenses. So the metrics that we tracked over each year for the last, I'm going to say for the last at least 10 years, but it's probably longer than that. We record, again, how well we are doing at achieving the outcome of reducing those total number of offenses. And in 2020, what we ended up was a total of 143 theft from vehicle incidents that we took offense reports for. And in the burglary and B&E category, 59 total. Now, how that compares against historical benchmarks, 143 offenses in 2020 was a slight reduction of the number of offenses we had recorded from the previous year. It's not the lowest we've ever had, but it was a reduction from the previous year. And then in burglary and B&E offenses, again, it was a reduction. We had 59 recorded offenses we took reports for. The previous year was 60 total. To put those numbers in context, when I started here in 2003, those first few years as we started tracking metrics specific for theft from vehicle, and Commander Somerville can jump in here if I'm misremembering, but it was typical for us to experience right around 300 of those offenses over the course of the year for the first few years I was here. And then steadily over time, we were able to see some impact in reducing the total number of occurrences that were recorded. 143, and again, I've said this before, but I try to make sure I say it each and every time we present the statistics. No amount of crime is acceptable to us. Our goal is to be zero. We shoot for zero, and we continue to focus and track as each and every month what we are seeing experienced numerically, so we can see if there are rises or trends in the activity, and we can adjust our resources and response tactics and strategies to help better achieve that goal over the course of the year. So we did see reduction in theft from vehicle over the last year. In burglary and B&E, again, while it's only a reduction of one offense, certainly that's one less victim that we had in our community last year. And in context, 60 in the previous year in 2019 was a historic low for us. So to even keep it there and to see even that number reduce this year, we're certainly very proud of that as well. All of this, again, in greater context, we also know that last year's pandemic put a pause on some of the activity we might normally see. So we are also cognizant that while we did see reductions in these two categories over the last year, we still have been very focused on our efforts in contributing to even further reductions in the future. So a couple of the trends that I wanted to highlight for the group and for anybody in the community as a way to help us continue this effort, because it's not through our efforts alone, although our officers have done a fantastic job over the last year of staying focused during what were really extraordinary circumstances for everyone. The additional pieces we wanted to focus on and share with the group moving forward is we had 38 of the theft offenses that we took last year were stolen vehicles, and that is that's a lot of stolen cars over the course of the year. And we can speak, if you have interest at some other time in the future, if you have questions even tonight, what the trends in that looked like, because there were periods of time over the course of the year and individual instances where multiple cars were taken. But the take home for the group and for our efforts in reducing theft offenses, specifically as it relates to stolen vehicles, is the majority of the cars that were taken were cars that had the keys with them, or and as technology advances, and I own a car and drive a city car that's the same way. Whether you have a fob and it's just a push to start, it's very easy to, in a quick to or from the vehicle, either at home or if you're at a business or anywhere you're going, leave that fob in the car. And what we saw were the majority of cars that we have taken either have the keys with them, where it's a physical key, or a remote, where it's just a push to start and the vehicle then ends up missing. So if we can just remind our community members to take all property of value with them when they leave the vehicle, but specifically to remember the key for the vehicle, our hope is that that'll help us reduce that number, and that's one we'll pay attention to closely as we move into next year in making sure we're doing everything we can from an educational standpoint and from a prevention standpoint to reduce those number of offenses. And the other statistic that we shared during the October meeting, I don't know if I got a chance to share with this group previously, but one of the offenses that really stands out for us as it relates to theft from vehicle activity is specifically when firearms are taken from a vehicle. And we all know that firearms certainly in the wrong hands pose a threat to the safety and are a danger to everyone in the community. So as a reminder, as we go forward, we have traditionally shared tips for keeping your property safe and reducing the number of theft offenses in removing property. One of the specifics we want to highlight in the future is if you own a firearm, certainly if you choose to do so, make sure you carry it legally and safely. If you're going to carry it in your vehicle, make sure it does not stay or in your vehicle unattended, and that you secure that in your home as well. So those were the highlights really in that metric-driven perspective from us in our ability to work actively to reducing criminal offenses or reducing incidents of crime in the community. I don't have a slide for it, and the reason for traffic safety. We do track the number of crashes that occur in the community each year. We tend to hover right around 900, which is a lot of crashes, and that stayed pretty consistent with a minor fluctuation over the last several years. This last year was a significant reduction, and by significant I mean it was 300 crashes less than we saw the year previous. But we attribute that primarily to there was a lot of time where the world was shut down and we didn't have commuting occurring normally. We certainly had a period of time where we didn't have students coming and going from schools, and we had a lot of major businesses that decided it was safer for their employees to stay at home to work from home. And so we would attribute, again, good effort to our officers in being out in the right places at the right time, conducting activities to make it safer, and educational campaigns to make sure everybody is traveling safely as well. But that major reduction, 300 reduction in crashes, would be very difficult for us to sustain. And I hope that the world opens up, but I do not hope that we return to that same level of crashes. We're going to work as hard as we can, again, with that goal of making sure we're improving traffic safety through our continual efforts. So I just wanted to go through our reflection on our goals from the previous year. Frankly, the goals for responding to critical incident preparedness and addressing significant issues of community concern, those are pretty voluminous, and I don't want to spend the entire meeting going through all of those, but those are things that we will make sure we put in our annual report, and as we get a chance to share that with all the members of the committee and all the members of the community, highlights we would like to include there as well from all 4 of our goals. So that quickly and as succinctly as I'm capable of doing sometimes is the information on our goal update for 2020. So without any questions, and I can pause here at the end of it, I want to move in, and this won't take nearly as long, but I wanted to talk a little bit about our 2021 department goals. So we've talked with the members of the committee in the past about our goal setting process. So we meet in December as a supervisory team to discuss what our goals will look like moving forward. So if Lieutenant Tavernick, if you could pull up, if you have that document from Ms. Metcalf on the goals for 2021. Unfortunately, much like every other meeting during the pandemic, we had to adjust and adapt. We ended up having to have a virtual staff retreat with the supervisors, which is not as conducive to maybe some of the full dialogue you would normally get if you were able to all be in the room together. But we were able to discuss the goals, and what we felt at the end of that discussion really was, because 2020 was so unique, we felt like there were things that we listed in goals in 2020 that were really important to us we did not get a chance to accomplish. And I'll walk through a couple of specific examples if we can put up the goals from 2021. But we wanted to keep them in front of us because we felt like if they were important to us then, they're important to us moving forward. And but the goals will, again, the same traditional goals will, and they're all, again, intended to underline and support our mission of protection, service, and public safety in partnership with the community. But our goals will continue to be critical incident preparedness and response, theft offense reduction throughout the city, improving overall traffic safety, and addressing issues of significant community concern. In particular, Goal 4 last year for us, addressing issues of significant community concern, was new for us. It was a little bit of a redesign to really pay intentional focus to what we call 5 buckets underneath that goal. The first of which was community outreach and engagement, which again will continue to be a focus, an intentional effort on our part on a number of fronts. Special event safety, what is a big goal typically for us for those large major marquee events, making sure that we are as prepared as we possibly can be to make sure that those events are safe. Drug enforcement and education continues to remain a focus for us. Human trafficking awareness and enforcement we kept as a bullet underneath that goal. And then the one we didn't really get a chance to delve into as much as we had hoped last year was mental health awareness, and really this discussion community-wide about mental health awareness as a community, suicide awareness, and suicide prevention. We had intended last year to hold a town hall forum to have a discussion about mental health awareness and suicide awareness and suicide prevention, and we did not get a chance to do that last year. Fortunately, we've had some good momentum already starting out this year in that discussion, so we can pick the threads back up and figure out how we do that either remotely if we have to this year, or with any luck, as the year moves along, in person and with community members face to face. So that continues to remain a bullet for us underneath that goal of addressing issues of significant community concern. And then the last bullet we added that I wanted to just highlight briefly, we have taken on an initiative that is related, but very intentionally focused on a specific group for us. And we've had some discussion with the members of the advisory committee and some of our previous meetings as well, and it's a focus on employee health and wellness. So we have begun our efforts in building what we hope will be a comprehensive plan for the members of all the members of our organization with a focus on employee health and wellness. And some of the sub-bullets that we have highlighted that the Bureau commanders are working on and will be working with all members of our organization to help develop are the development of a peer support program for our organization, a formalization of a wellness committee within our organization, and then the last piece that I've asked Lieutenant Latanzi actually to take a look at, and he's been starting some work on, is a suicide prevention policy for our organization. So those are the bullet points underneath that new sub goal of employee health and wellness. So again, those are the goals that we talked about primarily. Last year, they're all the same except for those highlights I just brought up just now. We can send that out, and we will make sure we send in the aftermath of the meeting tonight out to you, so you have that document, and so that you can, as we have discussions throughout this coming year, ask about our progress on each and every one of those goals, and help us share information with the community about those goals. Any questions before I move on to the last couple pieces? And I promise I'll be brief, and I will be done with my bullet points for the evening.
Congratulations for all the achievements, and thank you for your service and your team service. And it's been great. My question is, what are the strategies, tactics? Maybe you don't have to tell all of them. Maybe pick one which worked in last year or which did not work, and how we are going to improve on that.
Yeah, so that's a great question, and I will briefly go through, and because we had the slide up, I'll talk about, because it is the #1 reported crime we see in Dublin, theft and theft from vehicles specifically. So each month, we take the information we are able to gather, because we collect a lot of data as a police department, and we are very fortunate to have a crime analyst whose function is to take in that data, take a look, and turn that data into usable information for us to be able to direct our resources in the right locations at the right time, and efficiently and effectively use our resources and our officers to help reduce those number of offenses by being in those right areas based on the information and data that we have. So as a strategy and tactic, crime analysis, what we focus on is people, places, problems, and patterns. And each month, what our crime analyst does is he takes that data, distills it into information that, in best case scenarios, it becomes intelligence. It's information about theft offenses that are occurring specifically, and I'll give you an example. If we have purses that are taken from a particular parking lot or a particular hotel, maybe where we have seen a number of offenses occur over the last several weeks or for a period of time. What we do is we put together a report that is a crime analysis report that is shared with all of our supervisors to reflect and predict where crime might be occurring based on that information, so they can direct the officers and their resources to the right places within either their district that they work or within the area of the city, combined with other officers that they can focus their attention. So we have found that that's been a particularly effective strategy for us, because we're using the information to help guide us, as opposed to us just traditionally, maybe in decades past, sort of random patrol, where we might just be out and available and simply responsive to when we get calls. Our officers can then focus their efforts in being, again, in the right places at the right time, based on the data and information to help guide us.
Thank you.
If there aren't any other, I thought I had somebody else. There was somebody else who asked or was getting ready to ask a question too, and I didn't want to move on.
You
yes.
kind of broke it down pretty well, and my question was kind of going in the same lines as well. So one additional thought process is, like, for the accidents, the data that you collect, and you kind of mentioned that, historically it has been 900 or so many, accidents reported per year. But this year it was down to 600. Are there some patterns on certain segments of the, tertiary roads or, the main roads that go through Dublin, where, like, some kind of precautionary or preemptive approaches can be adapted to reduce that number of crashes and stuff?
Yes, that is certainly exactly what we do with that category as well. So very similarly to the theft offenses and the theft from vehicle offenses, what our crime analyst does is he takes a look at the crash information along with Ms. Metcalf, and they put together a report and analysis of where those crashes are occurring, so that, again, we can direct our traffic enforcement efforts, our traffic safety efforts, prevention, and education in those areas that we feel like has the best impact in reducing overall crashes throughout the year. Our main carriers, it won't be, I think, too surprising to know, our main carriers of traffic in the community are the ones where we tend to experience the most crashes. So 270, 33, I'm trying to remember the others, Riverside Drive, the roundabout in particular has been one that we've paid close attention to over the last several years, because anytime you change traffic pattern, it takes them a while for people to adjust. So that's the reason we take a look and analyze that data as well, and have that as part of our strategies and tactics. In addition to that, though, we have some really fantastic partners at engineering in the police department. So the traffic enforcement unit meets regularly as a traffic safety committee with engineers, because there are some issues with traffic that are not always solvable entirely by writing tickets. It may be a design question or concern, and there may be answers, but it may take a balance of strategy of enforcement, education, and then redesign to be able to, again, holistically take a look at a traffic issue based on the data that helps drive our perspective in partnership with the engineering department to help solve that issue.
Excellent. Thank you.
Chief, I do have a real quick question. I know you're trying to wrap up and we keep asking more questions, but how does the department, whether it's thefts, car accidents, whatever, how do you manage? I know there's pockets that are Dublin City borders, but it's Columbus jurisdiction. So how do you manage kind of those things and tracking that data and dealing with those issues?
That's a really excellent question. So fortunately, our crime analyst is very well connected and tied into the information that is occurring in adjoining jurisdictions. So we share information with other police departments, other crime analysts throughout the central Ohio area. And when we have more time in the future, what I would love to do is have Lieutenant Tabernick and Lieutenant Latanzi talk about their specific work groups and how occasionally the success of us being able to address a spike in theft or a group who may be working not just in Dublin in stealing property, but in other areas of Columbus or central Ohio, getting connected to those investigative resources, those proactive resources that are able to go out and bring an end to that run of activity. We, in particular, our community impact unit, that's a resource that's flexible, that will go to wherever we need to during whatever time we need to help address when we are able to identify this group of people seem to be who we are hearing from either our intelligence information or our data or from other organizations are involved in criminal activity. And if we can help put an end to that, even if it occurs in another jurisdiction, the benefit to the larger central Ohio area is we see a reduction in those offenses. But we want it to be driven again by the data information that we collect and share, and then the data information that is collected by other organizations that they share with us. So in that way, we're tied into exactly what, well, as much as we can, what's occurring at our borders, and then even beyond through shared information resources in the central Ohio area. Good. Those are fantastic questions, and thank you. And I would talk all night about everything we do. So, I want to be mindful of everything else, though. We want to, but I think it's important as we go along. You guys get to know what we do each and every day, and help us understand. Maybe there's some things out there that we can consider to help improve those efforts. So, the couple other pieces I just wanted to share real briefly was at the end of the year, another piece that we really love having, and we are sorry we aren't able to do because it would have been great to have you there and be witness to it. So we're going to find a way to share it anyway, even if it has to be virtually, is our office or our department awards recognition program. So it's our Officer of the Year, our Leadership Award, our Civilian Employee of the Year, our Volunteer of the Year are the major awards that we get a chance to hand out at the end of the year, but it also is a reflection of all the awards we have presented members of our organization throughout the year. So it really is a nice opportunity for us to pause each year and really look back and reflect and really recognize the fantastic effort of our members each and every year. So Lieutenant Tabernick, Corporal Morris, and Rebecca Myers are working on a way for us to be able to do that and share that virtually. And I'd love nothing more than to be able to share it with the members of the committee when we get that finished, so you have an awareness again of who we have here and the fantastic work that they do. And then the last piece, I just want to again thank you all, but I want to thank Susan Ortega as well, specifically for her recent efforts. She came and joined us with members of her team at our most recent staff meeting to share some information with our group about a program that Sentaro is offering for support for first responders and backing. The program is called Backing Our Front Line, and so they spent some time with us to talk about the opportunity that exists through partnership with Sentaro for support for our membership, and certainly we're very appreciative of not just them spending the time, but continuing to stay engaged as we talk about officer wellness. There's only so much that you can do on your own as an organization, and to not lean into the community and the resources would be remiss. And again, achieving the right goal, which is to make sure that our members are taken care of and healthy and well, so that they can go out and take care of this community, as we've talked about in the past. So I want to thank Sentaro and Susan specifically for coming in and sharing that with us. And the other piece I wanted to highlight, I did not get a chance to list, But there is another piece that Susan has worked with, along with Rebecca and Lieutenant Latanzi. There's an article that will be published in an upcoming issue of the Dublin Life magazine. And the article is entitled, Making Suicide Prevention a Community Priority. And much as we talked about for that goal specifically, we did have designed to have a larger community conversation, which we're going to work very hard to pick up and have this year, because we think it's so important as from our organization and as a public safety and community wellness initiative to have critical dialogue about mental health, suicide awareness, and suicide prevention. And the piece that they've come together and the article that they have written for Dublin Life magazine, I feel is a very powerful piece, and absolutely we hope is the foundation for those continued discussions as we move forward into 2021. So thank you again to them for that, and please, if you get a chance to read that, I would encourage you to do so. And I'm sorry I took so long, Judge, but that is all I have for the Chief's update to the committee.
Well, thank you for all of that information, Chief. And certainly, Susan, it's okay to smile a little broader, given the work that you have taken on with Sentiro to assist the police department. The committee thanks you for that work as well. And Chief, I think that in the future, you don't have to worry about how much time you spend on the updates, because it's important information and it's a lot to try and digest. And when you go that fast, we might miss a little. So, you know.
I would say I was nervous or I was rushing. This is just how I talk. We will send as much of that information as we possibly can out to you, and we don't want to overwhelm you, but you can digest it at your leisure then too.
Okay, great. Thank you. We're going to go back to the new business portion of the agenda at this time. And I'm going to ask that Ashmiri lead this portion of the meeting and the discussion. We had a number of different conversations over the course of the last 2 or 3 weeks. And I'll just preface this by saying that I appreciate Ashmiri's passion for wanting to give everybody an opportunity to have time and space to discuss what we're calling current events. So, Ashmiri, I'm going to turn things over to you.
Thank you, Judge. So I appreciate Chief giving us the space to discuss this. There has been several events that's happened in the past month that I believe this committee needs to address as a whole as being a diversity, equity, and inclusion committee. And for anybody who's watching, I just wanted to lay out some of the rules that we it's not rules, but guidelines that we're trying to follow today, since we did previously want to talk about the SROs again this night because we didn't finish our conversation from last month. We're trying to limit this current event conversation to 30 minutes, and we're giving each community member about 2 to 3 minutes to express any thoughts or questions that they may have. And Chief, I would urge you to just maybe listen, and other officers, and if there's any questions that have come up, maybe answer next time after thinking about it. I mean, I know you're not aware of everything that's going to be said, so I don't want you to be put in a position that you have to answer very quickly or come up with an answer on the spot. So right now, I'll just open it up to the floor, and whoever wants to start can start, and then we'll go on to the next person.
Yeah, I'm more than happy to start. First of all, just want to thank everybody for being here, taking the time out of your busy schedule. I know for me personally, the more time I spend on a virtual platform, the more challenging it is for me to be motivated to do things on them. So thank you for taking the time to do that, first of all. Officer Nimmo, Officer Burks, Lieutenant Latanzi, the folks I didn't get to say hi to. Hello, thanks for being here. So there are a ton of things that have obviously been on my mind the past couple weeks. It's been a challenging couple weeks to say the least. That's probably the understatement of 2021 so far. But the first couple things that leap out in my head are the, if we're calling them critical incidences that happened in the Columbus area. They seem to be creeping in and becoming closer and closer to home, whether that's physically or otherwise. And so as it pertains, my biggest concern regarding critical incidences in this community specifically relate to body worn cameras and the transparency behind those things. And of course, I don't know the logistics behind them, but to me, there's no excuse for a lack of transparency when incidences like those happen. And if there's a way to ensure that that's not the case moving forward, that's something that I'd like to work towards going forward. And really, as a Dublin graduate and someone who cares about this community as much as I do, I would really hate for this to continue to creep in closer and closer to home and it be somebody that I know or somebody that I'm close to. So I really want to, moving forward, make sure that this doesn't happen in Dublin. And then really quickly, as it pertains to the events of January 6th, I really want, it was really a wake up call and sort of a reminder and a reaffirmation that we have a lot of work to do, especially knowing that there were a handful of law enforcement officers and military personnel that were involved in that insurrection. Again, I know in many ways we discussed Dublin not being the issue, and I hope and pray that certainly no one from Dublin was involved in that. But it certainly reminds me that we have a lot of work to do, and I'm really looking forward to hopefully, sort of eradicating some of the things that seem to be hiding in plain sight. So those are just some of my thoughts. Hopefully, I kept that to about 2 or 3 minutes.
Perfect, Cam. Thank you.
Before you go on, though,
okay,
I'd be happy to defer another minute to that young man if he would like to.
I know he's so amazing.
If there's anything else that you didn't get to touch on, Cam.
Well, first of all, I appreciate it. It's been challenging just seeing, specifically and on a personal note, folks that are close to me, who are older, who have been through things, and how that relates to where we are now, and then just seeing treatment of certain individuals who are doing objectively far worse. It's just a bit frustrating, to say the least. But I'm thankful for the opportunity to be here and hopefully make some sort of positive change moving forward.
Thank you, Cam. Who would like to go next?
I can go.
Okay.
So on the contrary, I mean, just because you guys try your best to do the best for the community, irrespective of color and all this stuff and race. Again, we are humans and sometimes mistakes happen. So to proactively address those, I mean, being compassionate. Some of the times you hear about, because we only address or points out when bad things happen. I'm sure there are 2 or 3 good things happen every day. So it's education, right? I mean, awareness, bringing the awareness to the community. So it could be a marketing tactic, if you call it, just kind of so that people can see, okay, all police are not bad, or some of them are not bad, but some of the things you guys do and some of the examples, I'm sure. So just how to, when bad things happen, entire TV channels, everyone shows, right? January 6th is a different event. I mean, once in a lifetime event, good or bad. But it's definitely bad. But just in general, like, how to proactively bring awareness and educate the community that just we are no different. We are human beings and just we do good things. Yeah, some things bad happen, but just no one talks about good things, right? I mean, very few. So just I'm giving a different perspective so that people can think, okay, just not everyone is bad. And then when they interact with the it happens in the first 2-3 minutes, right? I mean, perception, something went bad, and just the reaction from both sides. So how to proactively improve on that? The human relations are being compassionate and
Thank you, Doctor. Is there anybody else who'd like to go next?
Just a couple. Oh, go ahead.
Go ahead, please. That's all
Oh,
right.
sorry. Thank you. I was just going to say, just agreement with everything that's been said, and just a couple thoughts that continue to run through my head as we, you all know, we do a lot of work across the lifespan with a lot of young people. Just kind of wondering how the events of the last few weeks, and not only the events, but the reactions of the adults to the events, how those have been impacting young people in our community. And just kind of thinking through not only how we as a committee, as a collective whole, but as individuals can model and communicate with everybody that we come across our paths. Just I don't have eloquent words today because it's been a lot. I'm just trying to manage a lot of crises in the aftermath of people trying to navigate their own mental health and well-being based on these events. And so kind of just to reiterate to folks what the doctor was just saying, good things happen too. We're not going to lessen the importance of these events that just happened, because we have to look at them. We have to take them into account. We have to realize that that is a reality. But we also have to try to help folks balance out what comes next and how do we dig into things and have these real hard conversations and look for the hope. And so I think as a community, we can do that, but those are just some of the thoughts that have been kind of spinning around in my mind for the last couple of weeks.
Imran, you are next.
Thank you. Thank you, Mary. And my sentiments are kind of like, all over the place, just like, Cam kind of mentioned at the beginning, and also Dr. Sri and Susan kind of, eloquently put them as well. I always like to see the glass half full. In a sense, yeah, I mean, yeah, this incident that happened, or the tragedy that we all witnessed on the January 6th, at the Capitol was like, once in a lifetime, or maybe once in the first 200 years of our civilization as the United States of America has occurred. But the positive thing that came right about after that was, the affirmation, the Republicans and the Democrats, in majority coming together as our political elected leaders and, certifying the election results, and our democracy kind of prevailed. And this, the positive thing we just all witnessed a couple of days ago was the transition of power, which has been kind of the beacon of hope and the benchmark of our republic was still sustainable. So yeah, there's always, negatives that happen, but, then how do we come together as a community and create the positive out of two negatives? So my understanding is that, as Cam mentioned, that a lot of these things are also hitting very close to home. I mean, there have been protests, and there have been kind of like miscommunication and misunderstanding that has occurred between the communities all over America. But what do we do here locally in Dublin, especially, in our own hometown, in our own backyard? I know there is some thought process and some discussion that, I've kind of overheard from the youth, especially since I have, like, just like all you folks have children who are in Dublin high schools and Dublin middle schools. So there's some, like, cross conversation that, the law enforcement's engagement, how do we keep that positive aptitude and positive persona of the engagement of law enforcement with the community going forward? So I would kind of defer this kind of more towards Chief, on the call, and maybe you may have an answer now, or maybe you can bring an answer back to us, like, or pointers, like, in the next conversation, that how do we kind of, like, continue to work in joint collaborative solidarity between the community relation as well as the Dublin Police Department to keep that positive for our youth. And as Susan kind of mentioned, that we work through all spans of different demographics, like, youngs and adults and, elderly and, like, children in schools and elementary schools. So how do we keep that relationship, that perspective of positive community work intact going forward? I know there's a lot that's already existing out there, but, how do we kind of come about and reinforce it for our youth so that they don't get any negative perspective developed because of these events that has happened in the last couple of weeks. So
I would like to make some comment as well.
Go ahead.
I moved to US in 98, experienced 9/11. I would never imagine what happened on the January 6th is gonna happen in US, because that's not what I came to this country for. So it was completely shock. So what I want to mention is that how did we get there? How can we go forward, fix that issue? We know that in workforce, we say, do not talk about politics, do not talk about religion. Is that really the right way? How can we bridge a conversation between two parties or different beliefs, and so that things like that won't happen? And also, I don't believe that would be only happening in DC. When that first happened, when my daughter texted me saying, you know, if this is Black Lives Matters, then among the police force getting ready, get prepared would be different, which kind of a different perspective. And then afterwards, of course, you hear someone else mention about the same thing, which for me is almost like, really, that would be unbelievable. I want to mention or ask our Dublin Police Department, do we have that kind of unconscious bias toward the race as well? Do we have data to support that we don't have that kind of unconscious bias? Thank you.
Thank you. Would anyone else like to go? Is there anybody else? Iso, I think you're left.
Yeah, thank you. I'll echo what Yanling said about the emotions that flooded my mind as I was watching what happened in DC. As an immigrant, it was very difficult to watch happening in this country. Absolutely difficult. And I don't know that I have any other word to describe it. And I think if you listen to the speech by President Biden, the key word was probably unity. Flip side of the fact that it had to be a key word is the fact that the country is so divided. So oftentimes we're quite on this side or that side. And unfortunately, what that means is a lot of people tend to see the fact or facts a little bit differently from their own perception. And for those people, if not for everybody, perception truly does become the reality. And if you extrapolate that, I don't think you can deny the fact that there are many, many, many people in this country that tend to look at the police as a whole with a doubtful eye, with a negative feeling. And that's just a fact. So, for us in Dublin, obviously we don't have the answers just because we happen to be in Dublin, Ohio. But what I would like to encourage our friends from the police department is to see whether you are communicating with the community. Because I think you do the work honorably. You do the hard work every day out there. And I want you to be proud of what you do day in and day out. But are we communicating what it is that you do and what it is that you feel when you think about? When people think the police are our enemy, are you communicating as a police department that, yes, we hear you? Because people are wondering, do they hear me? First, you have to recognize that you're hearing that. You have to recognize that that exists and that is a valid opinion, instead of denying that that is nonsense. And then I think only then we can have constructive conversation. And I am hopeful and I'm confident that constructive conversation can happen, because just as Imran says, I am a glass half full, if not more than half full kind of a guy. And as I keep saying, I am proud to be associated with City of Dublin, what the police department does day in and day out. just as I want you to be of what you do day in and day out. I recognize that that's out there, that negative feeling, and communicate that, yes, we hear you. Let's talk. Not quite sure how to make that happen, but I think that's what needs to happen.
Great point, Esau.
Thank you, Sal.
Yeah,
Judge,
thank
would you like to go next? I have something written down. You can go, or I can go, whichever.
No, I think I should go, and I think I should leave it to finish up with you.
Thank you.
I may not be 2 or 3 minutes, and I'm not going to rush through the kind of things that I want to say.
No problem, Judge.
But Chief, you know how committed I am to this undertaking and how much I'm leaning in to try and help build the bridges that I think that we need to forge throughout the communities in Dublin. There are 3 things that I've shared with our community partners that really have concerned me as in terms of current events over the less than a month, last 3 weeks or so. First were the shooting deaths of Casey Goodson and Andre Hill in Franklin County. Again, these are unarmed men of color who lost their lives at the hands of law enforcement. And again, we know it's not Dublin, but it is law enforcement. The first young man, it was by a Franklin County deputy sheriff. The second young man who wasn't quite that young, at 47, was at the hands of Columbus police. And we know that Columbus is doing a lot in terms of reform and all of that kind of thing. But there were issues with respect to use of force that are policy related that I think needs to be, I think that we need to talk about. And I know that in your update in December, you talked about work that had been done and gave us information that Lieutenant Lattanzi had worked on. And I think that we really do need to get to a discussion on use of force. And, you know, we've got issues that we're subjects or topics that we're trying to work through right now. But that's a big one, along with your critical incident policy. I think that we're getting to a time and a point where we need to make that a priority in our discussion. And in addition, the issue or the subject, the topic that Cameron brought up about body cameras and whatever the policies are that the department has, I think that we just need to have a discussion about that, and so that the community is aware of the practices, the policies, the practices, and the potential ramifications if officer doesn't follow policy, procedure, or practice. The second one that I have mentioned to you, Chief, is what I'm calling the stand your ground gun legislation that passed and was signed into law by the governor. I don't know if it was the end of December or the first part of January, but you know, from a law enforcement standpoint, I wanted to know how the new law affects and or impacts the way that our department will protect and serve our citizenry. And I, in a real sense, I want to know of what, if any, concerns law enforcement, our law enforcement department might have about the new legislation that has been passed. I can tell you in relating to Esau's comment that there is concern, apprehension, and maybe doubt as to how people of color will be engaged, or the interaction they will have with law enforcement behind these issues that are on top of carry, conceal now, and stand your own ground. And it's just a concerning issue that you can't ignore. The last issue is what happened on January 6, 2021. And for me, it was concerning the level of mob mentality that was on display on the 6th of January 2021. And I have a different perspective than some of the other community members, because mob mentality leads to irrational actions. Like, how could that group of people really believe that in marching to the Capitol, that it was going to be okay to break in, beat up on law enforcement officers, and destroy property in elected officials' offices? I think that, people get worked up, and when you have mob mentality, it is very easy for things to get out of control. And from a historical vantage point, I think of mob mentality running deep in the relationship of people of color versus those people who feel privileged and entitled. And I can't imagine that any of us on this call didn't look at that situation and say, because we're concerned about diversity, equity, inclusion, social justice, and racial justice, how would a group of people of color have been treated if they had stormed the Capitol? Everybody can have their own opinion, but I can say that people of color feel that they would have been treated differently. And to Esau's point again, you can't deny that people will feel that way. You got to recognize that and be prepared to deal with it. And in the same vein, I was concerned that there were law enforcement officers that appeared to be aiding what I'm just going to call the mob. I think that all of those things makes the work that we're trying to do more difficult, because it builds doubt, it builds people looking at law enforcement with a questionable eye. And I don't think that we can ignore that that's what's going on. But again, from an optimistic vantage point, as someone who may speak next shared with me, if we don't do the hard work, if we don't have the uncomfortable conversations, how are we going to be able to move forward, and how are we going to be able to alleviate those doubts that people within the community have? And I'm wanting to say to everybody that's out there that we recognize the issues, that we're committed to doing, we're committed to bringing issues to light, and we're committed to working with the chief and the department to reach resolutions that are positive toward the relationship that this department has with all of its communities of color. And I know that that is more than 2 or 3 minutes, but that's what I wanted to share in terms of current events and how I hope, or how I intend to move forward with this committee and with the department.
Thank you, Judge. As always, your words are very inspiring. So I had to write down my thoughts because it's kind of a jumble, as everybody has said. Like, you don't really know what you're feeling a lot of things, and I wanted to make sure that what I say is clear and concise, but also effective in what I'm trying to communicate. So just bear with me. I'm going to read from a piece of paper. So first, while my words may sound harsh, I do want you to know that I appreciate the time and effort from every single member of the police department who is here and who has been here. And I believe there is a sincere effort to have a culture of acceptance and accountability that you are trying to strive for. However, I would not be doing what I have been appointed to do if I do not mention what I'm about to say. I want to address the events of 1/6/21. As I've already mentioned in an email, that we witnessed an unprecedented display of white supremacy at our nation's capital. At that time, national and state leaders spoke out against the insurrection. But what was lacking was the voice of our local leaders. And as chief and other high-ranking members of the police department, you are leaders in this community. And I know there is a strong inclination for our local elected leaders, and maybe in this department, to not mix local and national politics and to just ignore it. However, that is a position of privilege to not address these issues and to acknowledge that this is beyond politics, because this is not politics for people of color. This is our lives. BIPOC members of this community do not live in a vacuum. What happens nationally and statewide affect our members in this community. When I saw that there was a lack of acknowledgement across the board from Dublin leaders, I felt hurt and disappointment. When local leaders don't address and denounce racism and white supremacy that occurred on such a large scale, it creates doubt and anxiety. Is this community a safe place? Are we being heard? What was the purpose of the resolutions from June? What are the purpose of these committees then? These are the questions that I have been grappling with for the last few weeks. And maybe some actions that happen will answer these questions later. But I'm also contemplating on how our school resource officers and other officers can address and denounce white supremacy and systemic racism when we continue to ignore these events. Dublin has a large international population. Like a couple of our community members on this call, I am also an immigrant. My parents are immigrants. Part of this population, this immigrant population, they have lived through real genocide and real revolution. They have experienced it for themselves. And when they saw these events happen on a national level in this country, who knew what kind of triggers that they experienced and have been experiencing since then? And how can this city and these leaders believe that school resource officers can address these issues with children who go to these schools, who come from these families, if they don't even acknowledge that this is a problem that can be happening in these families? Now, DEI work is not easy and it's ongoing. However, it is not just the part where we acknowledge the holidays and the celebrations. We also have to have these conversations and also have to accept that these traumatic events are occurring and these are affecting all of the members of our community differently. So I hope that my words do not turn you off from our future conversations, and that we can figure out more ways to contribute to a positive and progressive environment for all of us. Thank you. And I think everybody is done, so I will hand it off to Judge again.
Okay, thank you, Ajmiri, and thanks everyone for your words, your comments, your thoughts, and the concerns that you've shared. Chief, I don't know if, I don't think we've used up our 30 minutes. I don't know if you have any thoughts that you would want to share at this point in time, or if there's anything that anyone who's affiliated with the department would want to say. I'm going to start with you because, if anybody's going to speak for the department, I would think it would be you. But any thoughts or any thoughts that you would like to share?
I do, Judge, and I appreciate. I want to thank you, foremost, all of you. Again, when we started this advisory committee, we talked early on about how there were going to be tough conversations that we were going to have. Judge, I think you mentioned something I want to make sure I address. And Ajmiri, before I go any further, I want to address what Ajmiri asked, which was you hope that this didn't turn us off to the conversation. And I want to assure you that it hasn't. Nothing could be further from the truth, because we started with an understanding that we were going to have tough conversations if we were going to have meaningful conversations. And Judge, you said something, that this is, there's hard work, and that it's difficult, but that's what makes it so important. That's exactly what makes it so important. And anytime anybody individually or a group or a community or a nation grow, it's not an easy path. It comes from pushing ourselves beyond our comfort zones and our known experiences to places where we may not have stretched ourselves otherwise. And so I think that's why it's so important that what you have shared with us tonight, and again, thank you for that, that we get a chance to digest and come back and share our perspective too. So I just wanted to say, first and foremost, thank you for that, and thank you for continuing and being comfortable enough with us. Hopefully we've created an environment here as part of our discussions with this committee where you feel open in sharing with us, and at times disagreeing with us and pushing us. Cameron said that very early on. His intention was to push you because we want to make you better. And that's what we want for this community, is for it to be better. And that's not because it's an indictment of where we're at. It is because we want better. And occasionally it may mean we've got to take a hard look at what we're doing currently and what we're not doing, and how we build a more inclusive and welcoming community, and how we actually address the issues and concerns that our community members have. So I'll go back through my list because I took notes as we went through it. I'm certain we'll have more discussion as we go on. For Cameron's point on the body cameras and transparency, we'd love nothing more than to spend some time as a committee and send you guys the policy ahead of time and then have discussion about the policy. We absolutely. For Cherie and for Esau, and I'm sorry, I'm probably forgetting others, and for Imran, talking about and sharing positive experiences. We have to figure out, and part of that was the reason I was sharing, I want to do a better job of us as an organization reflecting those occasions where our officers have not just performed well, but they've performed exceptionally. And our communications technicians and all the members of our organization have landed on making somebody's life better, one interaction, one call at a time. That's really what our reflection of our awards program is, but also building intentional contacts with members of the community that are not just responses to a call for service or a crime where that is not conducive to us interacting at a human level. It is really under the lens of the experience and event itself. So, how do we do a better job of continuing to build those and build upon, and again, a lot of the programs that our SROs are involved in, but a lot of the contacts we have throughout the community, how do we build upon those and make those intentionally scheduled and designed to answer the things you have all offered for us today about making the members of our community, in particular minority community members, comfortable with their police departments. I want to answer on the events that have occurred over the last several weeks, and since we've been together, there have been numerous that we've all been watching and been impacted by. And I don't want you to think that in any way they haven't also impacted us, on a personal and a professional level. And there are a lot of conversations that we have had internally as we talk about our practices, our policies, and our preparation as an organization. And certainly something, witnessing something at the same time as the entire nation was witnessing it on January 6th has an impact on us as well. And we have shared in the past, and I just want to reemphasize that what we saw were unconscionable acts of violence, and that's not democracy. And to see that occur certainly had impact on all of us as well. And so I don't want to go away from this meeting without giving clarity that that's certainly something we did take notice of. If we need to do a better job of articulating how that's impacted us, this is one venue to do it, and maybe there are others as well. But connecting to community members when we're all experiencing something similar, I think is very important. That's what I heard from what Ajmeri was offering and what so many of you offered tonight. But what we have said in the past, I want to make sure I emphasize again today for our community members, for this group, for anybody who watches us later, we don't tolerate extremist ideologies that threaten the safety of our community and again, that threaten our very democracy at the seat of our democracy, as we saw. I just want to make sure that I thank you for sharing with us your perspective and giving us the opportunity both now and in the future to come back and have, again, tough conversation about what we see, where we're at, and where we're going in partnership with all of you and with all of our members of the community. So thank you again. And if there's anybody else, the lieutenants, if you are inclined to share now, that's certainly fine. There are weighty topics here that I want to make sure, as we build an agenda in the future, we figure out the right way to put them in front of us so we can have a full dialogue and discussion and make sure we bring the right resources and have complete conversations on those issues. So if any of the other members of the agency want to share as well, I'd leave you time as well.
Chief, I would like to say something. I think it's important, all of these topics that are brought up by these community members, and definitely very appreciative to hear their thoughts and how they feel about things. But one of the things that I want to mention, I think it's important that we understand that we need to, when we're trying to do this work of equity and grow the knowledge of our police department, not only internally, but publicly, and for people to see us as a professional agency, which I think we do a really good job of as well. But one of the things that we need to make sure we do is that we don't confuse our feelings about things without understanding the full complexity of things that happen. I think that sometimes we can get caught up in having these ideas of, well, this is the way this certain topic makes me feel, and then we take a certain angle of how we feel about that thing because of how we feel about it. And I think it's important in this room, in this conversation, that when we talk about these topics, we make sure that it's okay to have the feelings and it's okay for them to be there, but we also need to come from a perspective of facts and understanding of some things like, for example, as Mary, I'm sorry if I said your name wrong, ma'am. People get my name wrong.
You're fine.
People get my name wrong all the time as well. So I'm kind of used to that. But the thing that happened on January 6th, the Capitol, those type of situations, as far as, and I'm obviously just an officer, and I'm not at the chief's level, obviously, and making statements for the entire police department. But understanding that those are tough situations for a local agency to have, and I understand, or I'm listening to your concern about people in the community potentially feeling like the City of Dublin Police Department doesn't care about them, by lack of a statement, either condemning it, obviously condemning it. So I want to reassure you that our department, from the lowest man in this room here to our chief who's present, we don't have those issues. And of course, I'm biased. I work for the police department, and I enjoy working here, and I take pride in the work that we do at the officer level, at the administrative level, all those things. But I think those things are hard for us to try to facilitate in conversation. I know someone brought up in schools, how do we reflect that to our young people who are wearing the school as SROs? And those are tough conversations, and we're willing to have them, but those are it's tough to interject those conversations without knowing what those kids know or what those kids have been shared with their families. And so it's hard to share even facts, because I definitely don't want to interject my feelings or my beliefs on a certain topic, because sometimes people in their home community, or in their home, and their parents have certain ideas of how they want to believe or react to something, and that's okay. That's their right. It's their family. And so it's hard for us to then take obviously I understand the condemnation of that issue happening, and it being a terrible situation for our government, for our agency, and for our democracy. But I think that as we move forward, when we have these honest conversations, I think it's important that while it's okay to have feelings, I think facts are just as vital to those things. So that when we have those conversations, we can say, okay, this is the way this is viewed, or I view it, but let's look at the facts. I think someone brought up the data, whether or not there's data of any type of biases. And I know that our agency keeps those type of records. And so those are available to show. And if there is issues, then we can address those. And our staff does a great job of doing that. So there is things in place for us to checks and balance ourselves. But then lastly, sorry, I probably took up the 2 or 3 minutes that was allotted. Lastly, I would like to say, I know that, with all of the current issues, since this conversation is about current issues, unfortunately, there was a local police officer in the state of Ohio that was killed yesterday. And so while any death is tragic, obviously it hits home for us, because every day that we go out to work it's a potentiality for that to happen. And so, it's an opportunity for us to kind of gain the full perspective from a police officer standpoint that all of these things are real. And so I appreciate being a part of the conversation. Thank you.
Thank you for your comments. I guess I just should add why I think it's important to make a statement, like publicly, maybe on social media. When somebody had told me at a discussion that when you make a statement, it creates a safe space, that person, that group of people will then feel safe coming to you. So when I say things like, what are these children feeling? Officer, you made a great point. How are we supposed to even know? Well, that child, that family will know that you are a safe person to go to if that has been stated, right? Like, you are, as an adult, as a leader in the community, if you have made this statement, then you have created that safe zone for people of color to come to you with those concerns. Because if there's no safe zone, if they don't feel safe, they're never going to come to you. And we have an obligation to let you know that that safe space has to be created by you.
Yeah, I completely 1000% agree with everything that was shared, both by the officer and Najmiri. And Judge, I don't know if we're ready here, and I don't want to push us into the next section of discussion, but my brain was making a connection for SROs and community liaison officers. you know, you made a really good point. How are you as an SRO supposed to know what is okay to bring up with a student? And so I think one of our jobs as committee members can be to have that discussion about how do we help facilitate ideas and also facilitate discussions with the school district about setting up that understanding that SROs are a safe space, that it becomes a norm for conversations about hard stuff to happen, whether it's, you know, every so often, so that kids just get and staff from the district just get the understanding, okay, we're gonna, you know, have this available space every month or whatever. So it becomes a norm, so that on the off chance, you know, an SRO is walking through the hallways and something recently happened and a student sees them, they're like, oh yeah, I remember, it's okay to talk to them about the hard stuff. And so I think that's something that we can do as a team to try to help set up that norm of those conversations, because I also don't want to put SROs in that position of opening up a can of worms that that student wasn't ready to talk about. But I definitely 1000% agree. And I also appreciate you mentioning the recent officer loss. I think we need to hold space for that as well. So thank you for that.
Can I leave? Sorry. Go ahead, Judge.
Well, I just was going to say that maybe this was a good time to transition into the follow-up discussion from the SROs. But Doctor, if you have something.
Just one comment, because you all know I'm an action-oriented guy, right? I mean, okay, we discussed last 1 hour. So what I would recommend is, if you all agree, just we have 2 or 3 issues, like Judge mentioned, or Hajbiri, just kind of maybe summarize into 2 or 3 issues and see. I mean, we can talk and actions on how to tackle those concerns or issues. Just okay, this is the issue we talked about. Let's say Judge talked about 3 issues. So we cannot handle. You cannot handle all of them, but just if you can pick 2 or 3 things which you can control and which you can provide a solution. So what are those, what actions you are going to take, and what is a communication strategy? It could be SROs at the schools, or just kind of once any incident happens, just we are going to address or communicate to the community within certain time or something. So whatever you are comfortable, but just I think it will be really helpful and action oriented, and we all can experience the results for having this community. And we all feel good. That's the best place to build trust and create a hope within the community, and get rid of fear and distrust. So I'll stop there.
All right. Well, I think we all have to do a little additional thinking about that. But thank you, Doctor. Chief, I know we've been heavy on our, maybe we didn't quite stick to 30 minutes after all. But I think that it's necessary for us to move on into the discussion with the SROs, and I don't want to shortchange it. We got about 20 to 25 minutes or so. So, Lieutenant Tabernac, I think that you're handling this tonight, since Sergeant Rice isn't here, right?
Yes, sir, that's correct. I appreciate you giving us time again to get back to the SRO discussion. There was some discussions in the last 2 meetings that we definitely wanted to make sure that we gave a venue for questions, but then we also wanted to provide some information to this group and to our community at large about some of the, anecdotal accounts from our SROs and some of the things that interest them, some of the touch points that they try to have every day at those schools. So we, on the agenda, you can see there's 3 general categories here, and we have 3 great representatives to cover those categories. But just to preempt it a little bit, we wanted to focus. Officer Burks has done a great job at Jerome High School and beyond, but he's the SRO at Jerome High School in mental health outreach, and making sure that he stays connected to his students. As we heard last time, these SROs take their job very seriously and see these as their kids. So he's done a lot of good work there, and I want to give him an opportunity to talk about that. And then we'd like to lead into having Officer Quintanilla talk about exactly those touch points and how he tries to foster relationships at the middle school level and the elementary level before the kids get into high school, so that we have those positive relationships that have begun at a very early age. And then finally, we've talked around a little bit, the difference between school discipline and legal issues that our SROs have to deal with. And so we wanted to have Officer Nimmo kind of cover a hypothetical example of that, or again, some anecdotal pieces from his extended experience as an SRO. So, and I also want to say, just because these three are great representatives for this, these pieces are being done by all of our SROs. So all 7 of our SROs, by Corporal Morris, by Sergeant Rice, who unfortunately couldn't be here tonight. But these are some great representatives to talk about specific pieces and specific things that we try to accomplish as a program. So without further ado here, I'd like to lead right into Officer Burks.
Okay, first of all, let me say good evening to everyone, to the whole committee, to Chief, to Judge Maynard. Hello, everyone. Again, I am the school resource officer at Jerome High School and a police officer there at Dublin, City of Dublin. As far as the mental health is concerned, I approach whenever I'm dealing with any situation from a point of empathy, where whenever I'm dealing with the kids, I try to see where they're coming from and try to give basically a helpful ear or listening ear, shall I say, to whatever they may be discussing. I also hear them out and use my training, to which the police department puts us through what's called CIT, or crisis intervention training, that enables us to better help when we come across somebody who might be in a state of crisis. Using all of that information, I'm able to basically talk down a lot of situations where kids are upset, maybe about home life or maybe the pressures of school. Note even being today, I ran across 2 issues. I come across them every day, but 2 issues where a young man said the pressure of school right now, especially during the COVID situation, and all the events that are occurring, that he just couldn't handle it today. And he had to call mom. He said, I just cannot handle it. I can't focus. I can't do anything. And as I sat there and spoke with him, I let him know. I said, that's all right. I said, this is a time where people haven't really experienced this before, especially the COVID times and the storming of the Capitol and everything else. I said, don't worry about it. I said, you just make sure that you gather yourself, think about it, talk to your family and friends, even talk to me if you ever want to come and talk to me, and then come back and address it. But I also let him know what the goal is. And he was a senior. I said, well, you have to make sure that focus back on your goals of finishing the hard work that you've done over these past 4 years, so that you can finish and then go on to college. And then from there, we talked about other issues. Again, a point of empathy where I talk to everyone. The CIT, I don't know, Chief, I don't know. I don't want to toot my own horn, but as far as being CIT, Crisis Intervention Team, I was the Officer of the Year for the state of Ohio there. And was it 2016, Chief? 2015? What? Wherever. But
I think it was the decade, as a matter of fact. Well deserved.
But again, point blank, wrapping up in a nutshell, I treat others the way I would want myself and other family members to be treated. when it comes to that. Whenever I'm dealing with someone, I know I'm nervous when my kids go out. I have two, one that's in the Navy and one that's in high school. And when they go out, I can't control it. No one knows that they are the children of Officer Burks or anything. And I hope that the officers who are out there treat them the same way that I would then treat someone else. And that is professionally, and to basically be a place of help for anyone who is in need of whatever, from directions all the way to maybe a mental state where to which they aren't able to handle reality. And hopefully I can bring them back down to the state that they were in before they reached that state of crisis. So as far as anything else, any questions? Thank you so much, everyone. I'm Officer Burks.
Thanks, Paul. Hey, I'm glad you recognized yourself for that award, much deserved. And if you didn't do it, one of us was going to do it. So it was going to happen. Don't worry.
Okay, just check and make sure.
I can also tell the members of this committee from my perspective, Paul and I worked on third shifts for a couple years, and his ability to develop rapport with people is about unmatched. So it was actually shocking at times. We showed up at different incidents, and Paul was able to calm people down. He was able to develop that rapport that we absolutely needed in those incidents. So thank you for that. Just wanted to recognize that real quick.
Thank you.
Officer Quintanilla.
My name is Officer Quintanilla, more affectionately known as Officer Q by my kids at my buildings. Sometimes it's slowly progressing to Officer Rigo, which is my first name. Lieutenant Tabernick, I think Paul's imposing figure is what played a big role into his being able to calm situations down. So I've been tasked with the topic of discussing the diversity in our schools and how, as officers or school resource officers, we interact with them. And I think, as we've noted before, our unit is actually probably one of the most diverse units in the entire police department, which bodes well for our ability to be able to facilitate conversations in the schools, not only with staff, teachers, and students, but it gives us the opportunity to invite each other into each other's buildings and have a different looking officer just from an aesthetic view, where it just looks different than what people mostly view police officers as. And I think that our unit has done a good job of being able to facilitate that. The other thing about communicating and how I interact, and I know that other officers have their own ways. Obviously, Officer Burks just spoke about his ability to be able to communicate. And a lot of it, at least I'll speak for myself, is the ability or the idea of coming in with an attitude of a servant, not being afraid to be vulnerable, even to the kids, because I've had a lot of conversation with kids that don't like the police. I mean, kids will be honest, and they'll tell you that they don't like the police. And I view that as an opportunity to say, okay, why? And sometimes that's a question, like as Mary had mentioned in our previous topic, sometimes just why is a good enough question to get some conversation going about why that student feels that way. And I've had many conversations about things, and most of them, or historically in my experience, they come from a negative experience that people had with the police. And it's not necessarily that the student had the negative experience, but someone in their house, some family member, and it doesn't have to be obviously the polarizing issues that were discussed already, but it's like, a terrible situation where there was a domestic violence issue and dad gets arrested or mom gets arrested. And as a child, they don't view dad as the bad guy. They view the police officer as the bad guy because the police officer is the one who took away their dad. And so I've been able to have a lot of those conversations with them and helping them understand that it's not, the officer isn't doing that to them specifically, trying to help them understand that the officer is just doing his job. The officer doesn't want to do a lot of those doesn't want anybody to go to jail, but when we're tasked with doing our job, sometimes those decisions have to be made, but the kid at face value in the middle of that incident doesn't fully understand that. And when you come back around and the next time they see an officer, it doesn't matter that it wasn't the same officer. It was an officer that was the bad guy that took somebody away. And so being vulnerable in saying, okay, why do you have an issue with police, or why do you feel that way you do, the way you do about police in general? Because a lot of times, like we've mentioned in this particular, or I've listened in this particular group, it's often mentioned, well, not in Dublin. Dublin does a good job of this, but not in Dublin, and so a lot of the perspective that I get to share is just, hey, it's police work is not easy. Having to make tough decisions about people's freedom is not easy. And people are ultimately hurt. And for us, the empathetic value comes in where we can understand, like, hey, this is a critical incident to them. While it may be us just doing another run, another call, it's a critical incident to that kid that's in the incident at the time. I've had really good experience with kids in interacting with them by just going up to them and talking to them, just trying to create a conversation. Hey, how's it going? Sometimes that's all it takes. Sometimes it takes a little more. The first time it's hi. The second time, hey, what's your name? Next time it's, what do you like to do? And next thing you know, that conversation is built and the relationship is built where, and I know Officer Burks, he's like world renowned over on that side of Dublin with Grizel, and Officer Nimmo is the same way with Scioto. I mean, we create, as SROs, our goal is to create an environment where we're a safe person, as someone had mentioned earlier, but we're also, like our title is, school resource officers. We're actually a resource for the kids and for the staff members and for the faculty members, teachers, all those people. We provide this environment. Obviously, our main role is to provide safety, but then just as important is for us to build the relationships and bridge the gap between the community and the police department. And what better way, I view it as what better way than to start with the next generation of children who are impressionable and who are wise enough, even in middle school, to make their own decisions about how they feel about things. But just as important, are impressionable, where you can have meaningful conversation with them and maybe at least give them a different perspective and help them to see a different angle of why things happen the way they are. Because a lot of the time when we don't understand something, we automatically fear it. And we all do that. If we don't understand something, the fear is the first thing. And so we make our decisions based on that fear without really knowing a lot of the facts that are behind it. And so I really cherish the opportunity to build relationships. And obviously this year, and even at the end of last year, it's been really, really difficult because you see the kids very rarely. You see them. And then when you do see them, their face is covered. So it's hard enough to try and remember, hundreds of kids' names, but then you can't even remember their face. It becomes a little bit more challenging, but that doesn't negate our role to provide a safe environment for them to feel comfortable to share whatever. And I know other SROs, and I've had some experiences where kids will come and share some things that are really, really on their minds and on their hearts about personal matters that aren't law enforcement related at all. They're just a friend, or they view you as a trusted adult that can provide some advice, again, from a different perspective than teachers, because we're obviously not teachers by trade originally. So I think that kind of answers your question, the question about interacting with people. I mean, it really, if I had to sum it down, it's vulnerability and action. Being, willing to hear the things that are on people's minds, like we have in this setting, their real feelings about things, and then having honest conversation about them and trying to work through them so that we can, and at the end of the day, we can agree to disagree, or agree, but we can have a meaningful conversation where we can both walk away and say, okay, I still don't agree, but I understand where their perspective comes from, or my perspective has changed and I see the way things he sees them, and it does make sense. And so I think that's a big role for us in the schools in creating relationships where another big thing that I view is like, I'm creating an environment for when an officer out on patrol interacts with one of my students, either from Davis or moves on to Scioto High School. And I know Paul, Officer Burks, and Officer Nimmo feel the same way. Our goal is when they do come in contact with a patrol officer from the city of Dublin, that they're going to be like, oh, I know Officer Burks, and Officer Burks treated me this way. So I expect that this officer, whoever he may be or she may be, is going to treat me the same way. And that's the avenue that is my goal, is to create a community from our youngins to have high expectations of the way that we react or interact with them, but by setting that as an example in the way that we do it. So, does anybody have any questions pertaining to that topic?
I don't have questions. I am actually very happy to hear that you are actively involved in seeking out students and talking to them. I think that's kind of what I was trying to say, is like, when you actively seek out and talk to community members in the same way you, Officer Q, I will use your students, that's where the real bridge building happens, right? Like, not really in these meetings, but in the actual day-to-day activities that people are having. If we as community members actively seek each other out, that's where the real bridge building is happening. And I'm very happy to hear that you're doing that in the school level.
Agreed. Thank you.
Have a time question, folks. We're very close to 7:30, and I know that there are a few more officers who are back with us who probably want to have an opportunity to share with us. Is everybody amenable to going a little longer tonight? Maybe 15 to 20 more minutes. Anybody that can't do it, or anybody that would prefer not to do it?
I have 7:30 meeting, but I'll stay for 5 more minutes. Definitely, I would like to listen more.
Thank you, Doctor.
Thank you.
Anyone else? Okay, Lieutenant Tabernac, if you could, if Officer Nemo is here, he would be next, correct?
Yes, sir. I also wanted to touch upon one point that Rigo hit on there, which is our interconnectivity between our patrol officers and our SROs. And I can tell you that the communication between the two bureaus, if you will, the two different assignments, is continuous. So an example I would give is, if a patrol officer has contact with a student outside of school, that information, and I'm not even talking about negative contact all the time, that information consistently gets passed on to our SROs, so our SROs can, again, foster that relationship even further. And if it was a negative contact for whatever reason, a curfew violation, for example, that SRO can be, that trusted resource for that student to either redirect or at least have the conversation with them, in furtherance of trying to keep kids on the right path as they move forward through their schooling. So our communication between our patrol officers and our SROs is fantastic, and it's always in furtherance of the best interest of those kids. So I just wanted to point that out there that Rigo hit on a little bit. Officer Nimmo.
Thank you. As both Paul and Rigo talked about, I mean, the relationship is the number one thing. I'll get to the discipline part in a second, but I just wanted to kind of build on that. I'll admit, being a 50-year-old white guy, it's pretty hard to build relationships with high school kids, no matter their color. But certainly working in a school that has a very diverse population, it's an ongoing daily challenge. and has been. I mean, I don't get along with my own teenagers that well at times. So to try and do it with 1,500 other kids is difficult at times. So it is constantly talking to them, whether they're an athlete. And years ago, when I first started as a school resource officer, Marina Davis, who was the principal at our school, I was having lunch with her and we were talking about some of the kids and this and that. And she said, everybody you're talking about is an athlete. And I said, well, they're the ones I know the best. She goes, you do realize we have other kids in this building. We have kids who are in theater. We have kids who are in choir. We have kids who don't do any extracurriculars. You need to make contacts with those kids too. And so it really has, that really woke me up. And so I try to seek out as many kids as I possibly can. I also have the benefit, I think it's a benefit. I live in the district in which my kids from my high school come from. My kids in my high school are my neighbors. My kids went through this school. So I've been able to use that to my advantage. You know, when a kid says, oh, you don't know, you know, I live here, I live there. I say, well, I lived right down the street from you for years. And now I live here, but I'm just a couple blocks away. So I've been able to use that somewhat to my advantage. When it comes to school discipline, one of the things that I tell all of the new SROs, and they cover this in the SRO training, but I tell all of the SROs to sit down with your principal every year at the beginning of the year and start off with the phrase, I don't work for you, I work with you. I am not a school employee. School discipline is not my job. Don't use me as the heavy. Don't threaten kids with, if you don't do this, Officer Nim is going to arrest you. I want to make sure that the administrators understand what my role is in the building, and that is safety, security as a resource to the kids. I'm not there to tell them not to chew gums or don't run in the hallway. That's not my job. Now, if I'm standing in the hallway and somebody's run down the hallway, do they usually slow down? Yeah. And all you got to do is kind of smile and shake your head like, yeah, good. But I don't even have to say anything generally. It took a while, and sometimes we've had issues. Now, I won't usually have that conversation with an administrator in front of the student. We'll go to the side and talk about it, but I make sure that they understand. They don't tell me. If I need to file charges, that's because I'm doing it because it fits within what the law says, not because that's what they want. On the other hand, we will also excuse ourselves and go talk about things like, okay, these two kids got into a fight. Well, is it a knockdown, drag out fight? Is it the typical schoolyard push and shoving, maybe, you know, one or two punches, but nobody really got hurt? And if that's the case, then maybe we'll talk to the parents. And if the parents are fine with school discipline, then we leave it at that. If it's a blindsided beat down, somebody's bloodied and it was totally one-sided where assault is more appropriate, then I will make that decision, and the school administrator will still do their school discipline, but that's totally up to me and the police department and the prosecutors to whether that goes forward. So there really is a big divide. I may, if somebody, for instance, is wearing drug paraphernalia socks, it's for some reason pretty common to wear socks that have little marijuana leaves printed on them, which is against school rules. I may pull the kid aside during lunch and say, hey, you may not want to wear that next time in case Mr. Scott, who happens to be our principal, you may not want to let Mr. Scott see those because you realize you're probably not supposed to be wearing those. So I don't start a discipline record. I don't send them to the office or anything like that. I just kind of give them that friendly, hey, may not be in your best interest. And again, I think that's a rapport building thing where I'm not calling them out. I'm not trying to play the heavy. I'm just giving them the friendly heads up of something like that. So the discipline really is completely separated. Many of the discipline things that school administrators deal with are violations of the law. Whether they rise to the level that we need to file charges, we're in Franklin County, at least my high school is. For me to send down a fight, a general schoolyard pushing and shoving scuffle, I hate to call them fights, a scuffle to Franklin County is a waste of Franklin County's time. It's a waste of those kids' time. That school discipline is generally plenty. If it's a one-sided assault where we're looking at medical bills or something like that, then we like to get the courts involved because, then they can mandate covering medical bills and things like that. So, but the run of the mill, you're late to class, you're skipping, things like that, truancy, that is not something that we get involved with from the police department. So, Lieutenant?
Thanks, Brian. I know we talked about that the last couple of meetings, and I wanted to give some room for any committee members to ask questions about any of those topics moving forward. Or if you want more information about those, sorry about that.
No, I just had a question for Officer Nemo. Since you do work in probably one of the more diverse high schools, I guess, and I don't know if you know, I'm an attorney. I work downtown in Franklin County. I see a lot of juvenile cases. So I don't see a lot from Dublin, which is always a good thing. I don't like students missing school for schoolyard fights, just like you said. So at what point do you make that determination that this deserves to go to juvenile court, or that this is something that the students or the families can decide? And have you ever, if the families were to push for you to press charges, have you ever stepped in and said, I really don't know if this is appropriate, but that would be like something private that they could take into consideration?
Sure. I wish I could give you a litmus test because each one is handled differently. Generally, the way I approach it with my administrators, if there's no injury and nobody's seeking medical attention, and the families are both okay with school discipline being done, we still document the fact that it happened so that if the families want to come back later and private file or something like that, they can. If there's certainly if I have to call a squad for somebody or something like that, that really changes the game. But I have had some parents, even in a pushing, shoving, not even an actual fist being thrown, where they want assault charges and they want to prosecute to the fullest extent of the law and all that kind of stuff. And at that point, we'll explain to them, I'll document it, and you can go down and speak to the prosecutor if you'd like. But I don't feel it rises to that level. There are other times where it's several instances, even though it may not rise to the level of an assault, but we have several instances. And at that point, I may work with our diversion coordinator and talk about maybe we do disorderly conduct. At least get the kid into some sort of supervision where our diversion program then keeps it out of Franklin High Court. It keeps no record for them. It's some probation, some community service, maybe an educational piece. We would much rather rely on that than send it downtown.
And the diversion program is in Dublin, the Dublin courthouse, or where is that involved?
Correct. It's done through Dublin Mayor.
Okay. And can you just describe what diversion would entail for some of these kids?
Sure. Generally, diversion is it's a probationary period. There's, depending on the offense, for instance, if it's an alcohol offense or a drug offense, there's an educational piece that goes along with that. And then there's usually some community service hours assigned. Basically, we're going to penalize them for their actions by making them do some community service instead of just a monetary fine. If they complete that program successfully, then the charges are never filed through the juvenile court. They just essentially, the incident goes away. Families enter into that program voluntarily. They're given the parameters of the program. If they choose to do it, that's great. If they choose not to, then generally the charge would be then transferred downtown.
And I'm sorry, I keep asking questions, and I don't know if anybody else has questions, but one last question. How often do you work with the school counselors on, like you said, that there might be an ongoing issue between a couple of students? How often do you work with the school administrators and counselors trying to resolve it before it gets to that point where it has to go to court?
As much as we possibly can. Anytime we hear the rumor of somebody doesn't like somebody, or this or that, or there's going to be a fight at lunch or whatever, we don't just sit there on pins and needles and wait till lunch. Those kids are called down. They're talked to with their counselors or the administrators. A lot of times I'll be brought in to see if they want to bounce things off of me. We are as proactive as we possibly can. I'm very, very lucky that my office is literally 5 steps away from my principal's office and 20 steps away from my counselor's. So I probably even overhear a lot more than I'm supposed to, but I'm right there in the office.
Thank you. Right.
I had a question that I had posed at our last meeting, and Officer Nemo and or Officer Burke or Lieutenant Tabernac, I'd like to ask the question again, and if any of you wants to answer, if any of you have given it some consideration, that would be great. If you haven't, that's fine, but I would like ultimately to have an answer to this question. I said, how did the events of last spring and summer impact your views on your job? And have you all had intentional discussions on efforts within the school to build relationships with minority students or students of color in the aftermath of last spring and summer's events? If anybody, I mean, time wise, I understand that everybody can't answer, and Officer Q hasn't had a chance to even consider the question. So it really is a Officer Nemo, Officer Burke, and or Lieutenant Tabernac question that I would like to have a response from.
Judge, I'd love to jump in. I have given it a lot of thought since our last meeting. I've been in policing for over 25 years. And, so I go back to even the Rodney King incident. And as I was getting into law enforcement, seeing that happen, anytime an incident like that happens, I'm a little embarrassed. I'm frustrated. I'm angry that's happening still to this day. Given the fact that when I came into law enforcement and seeing the Rodney King incident, that we're still discussing this 25 years later, it's frustrating and angering to me. There's no doubt that certainly with the George Floyd incident in particular, nobody can look at that video and justify it. So it just angers me that it still happens today. And I wish I had the answer to how to fix all of it. And it angers me that we all get lumped in to that same thing. I've been a cop for 25 years. I've never had an excessive force complaint filed against me. And I'm proud of that. I'm very proud of that. I'm proud that I've never had anybody come in and sign a complaint against me. So when I see that happen, it tears at my heart. I'm proud of what I do, and it frustrates and angers me that still happens within our profession. Just like I'm sure anybody else, if you see somebody from your profession on TV getting arrested for this or that, bribery, scheming, whatever, it upsets you and frustrates you as well. As far as working through the schools, we have not had a whole lot of chance with the COVID and everything else going on to really sit down and develop any kind of curriculums, because they're just trying to get what they can to the kids 2 days a week now, if not online. But those discussions are happening about what can we do when we get everybody back together.
Okay, thank you for that, Officer Nemo. And I just would say in general that I'm hoping that you all keep that type of question in mind. Going forward, keep it in mind in training situations, and keep it in mind just on the general issue of diversity equity, and inclusion in the Dublin Police Department in general. So thank you. All right. Guys, we got to move on. Rebecca, you still there?
Yes, I am.
All right. What's our next topic, Rebecca?
Let's see. We have public commentary, for which there is none for this meeting. And after that is the recommendations for future CAC conversations and the future meeting schedule.
Okay. All right. So we did 1 month. It's been 1 month this time since our last meeting. And I actually have a 2021 calendar now. And in February, the third week of the month actually would be the week of the 15th through the 19th. So the question would be in the email that goes out, potential dates for the 15th through the 19th and the 22nd through the 26th. So we're not going to schedule the next date tonight, but when Becky sends out the questionnaire, everybody look at your calendars from Monday the 15th through the 19th, and then Monday the 22nd, which the 15th and the 22nd might be days off. I'm not sure. They might be holidays. One of those days or both of those days might be holidays. But, you know, those are the 2 weeks that we'd be looking for to schedule the meeting for next month. And topic-wise, I certainly want to talk about, use of force. I want to talk about body cameras and that kind of thing, the critical incident policies, and I'm not sure if people want to continue in with SRO discussions, but I think at this point we would be maybe taking some time to think about recommendations that we would like to make as it relates to the SROs and maybe CLOs if we feel comfortable on that, and then share that with the police, with the chief, excuse me. And it wouldn't require the officers to come back again. We had talked about potentially having someone from the school district come in. I don't know if we feel like that's necessary anymore on the SRO CLO issue, but that too is probably something that we can discuss amongst ourselves between now and the next date, and let the chief know. Is that okay with the committee, and is that okay with you, Chief?
That is absolutely fine with me, sir. The only thing I would offer as reflection from our discussion tonight on current events is if we are bringing back policy or building an agenda, just the consideration on bringing our body camera policy to that discussion while it is on all of our minds and collectively as part of this discussion. We want to make sure we answer that in our upcoming meeting for sure.
Okay, great. And Chief, what policy would we be asking to discuss if we wanted to talk about controlling large groups and gatherings?
That is an excellent question. It would be our response to civil disturbances. So the policies that I thought we might have some discussion on today, and pulled were our response to resistance policy, our body camera policy, our response to civil disturbances as part of those discussions, and then connected to our response to resistance policy. One of the discussions that we have had, again, just so that you know, as we observe events that occur, whether in the Columbus area or in anywhere in the nation, it's a time for us to reflect on our own policy and figure out what that means. The other policy that we've been working on is our rendering aid after a response to resistance encounter. So I would offer that we would bring that policy back too, so we could have that discussion. So you have awareness of what we do currently, and then we can have a discussion about what that looks like as far as meeting community expectation and/or conversation about where we go to progress with that policy as well.
Okay, that would be great from my vantage point, guys. Anything else? Any other topics that come to mind right now? And if not right now, can we agree to try and have some idea about your thoughts or feelings on those things within the next 7 to 10 days?
I do have a couple. So use of force related to body cams, all the other activities, and then also mutual aid agreements between Dublin and surrounding communities.
Very good, thank you.
And Mary and Judge, I kind of have a couple of quick thoughts, if I can take maybe 30 seconds. So one thought is I was kind of going through the SOP and the statement of work for this commission or this committee that has been created. I really didn't find anything about the emergency meetings or situations like, as we saw happened on the January 6th. And then, of course, we waited till January 21st to have a meeting. So I think situations like, these, which are kind of like current events that can be impacting our communities and the conduits into our subcommunities all over, we probably don't want to wait for a meeting to happen like 3 weeks afterwards. So I think if some consideration or some discussion can be done between yourself, Mary, and the chief, to kind of put a clause for a future event of this nature to happen, then we should be calling a meeting right away. Because at the end of the day, a lot of community members that we are representing and in these discussions, they reach out to us and they want to know exactly what statements or what actions are being done by the Dublin Police or the Dublin City Council and stuff. So I think it might be beneficial to proactively think about those ideas. Second thought, I know Dr. Gautam has left the conversation and the meeting, but I want to build on his perspective as well, that we can sit here and talk and discuss everything under the sun, but unfortunately, at the end of the day, we have to be a value add relevance to our constituents. So I think those are going to be more driven by the actions and services that we are able to demo more often and more frequently. Relationship with the SROs and developing relationship with the campus constituencies of young adults, as well as the neighborhood population in general of the community. I think the good work, the more we can find ways to reflect it, and in the past, I think we have talked about having a maybe more of a YouTube channel or some kind of a platform where the chief can routinely make an address, or the city council or the city manager can make a routine address to the community. I think those are some of the venues we have to start looking into as a value add platforms, because we all live in social media age. We are hungry for information all the time. So it's very important that we have those natural and organic ways of connecting to the community in a more real-time manner, rather than waiting to for a newspaper to send out a statement on behalf of the city council or something of that nature. So I think it's something that we have to start looking into and maybe deliver it by spring or summer of 2021 as this commission's in the role. So some of those thoughts I just thought if we can have a discussion around them in the next meeting. So
I think both of those are excellent points and things that we need to certainly consider and move on, Imran. I think that when I was saying perhaps we can make some recommendations, for example, to present to the chief and the department as it relates to the issue of the SROs, is trying to get at that action plan component, so that we're saying, okay, we've had discussion, and here's what we think would be helpful to consider, and we can get feedback even from the community after it's presented, because it's going to take some time for consideration by the department and then implementation. But yes, that is great. And the other thing that you talked about in terms of being able to pivot and meet if an event or emergency takes place is really great. We certainly need to spend some time with the chief and talk about that, because we know that his time is very busy. So I think that those are great things, and we definitely, let's say that we will definitely talk about those issues and what we've come up with when we come back at our next meeting date.
Awesome. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
Judge, if I can just offer real quickly, thank you, Imran, for bringing that up, and just in reflection of our discussion and all you brought in that discussion on current events. There are always going to be current events. There's always going to be something we either could, should, or would make commentary on from our perspective, whether it relates to Dublin specifically and or ongoing conversations about policing in America. And so I think figuring out that right balance on when and how and what we're going to be able to say collectively from the department as a advisory committee, just in reflecting as this meeting has gone, during our discussion, the events of the Michigan governor's kidnapping plot. I think that communication, when I had discussion with members of the advisory committee on what's Dublin's answer, what's Dublin's information, we're hearing from members of the community who are reaching out to us, what can we tell them? The timing on that was fortuitous in that I think we talked about that, and then we had a meeting either that evening or within the next day or so. January 6th happened. It feels like a lifetime ago between then and us having our meeting and conversation today. So I do really appreciate, as I try to wrap my mind around, because how do we come together? How do we collectively have discussions that are important for this group, for our organization, for our community, and for our efforts in diversity, equity, and inclusion? How do we find a way to come together, even if it's not pulling this entire meeting together, but as Imran has suggested, if there is a medium for us to communicate to each other, share thoughts and ideas, and then figure out how do we share something with the community as well. I greatly appreciate sharing that thought out loud so we can start digesting that and figuring out what that means for us collectively moving forward.
Great. All right, guys, we're almost at 8. So anything else for the good of the order? I can't see everybody, so somebody's got to say something.
Everybody's silent. Nobody has anything else to add.
Okay, great. Chief, any closing remarks that you want to make before I entertain a motion to adjourn for the night?
No, sir. I just want to thank everybody again for coming together. I appreciate it. I want to thank the officers from our school resource officer program who have come back and shared with us tonight as well. So thank you.
Very good. And I want to say thank you to everybody. And I noticed in the notes from last month that I didn't thank Director Somerville for being in attendance. And I apologize for that, Jay. And I'm saying thank you tonight to you specifically, in addition to everybody else that was on the call.
Well, thank you, Judge. I appreciate it.
Okay. Is there a motion to entertain? Well, thanks everybody. I think that the discussion tonight, again, has been important, and I think is going to lead to some positive outcomes. So I appreciate you being with us and offering your input, being a participant. Now, is there a motion to adjourn for the evening?
I move to adjourn.
Is there a second?
I second.
You got in that time. All right. We have a motion. All in favor, say aye.
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 And I will say good night to you all.
Thank you.
Good night.
Good night, everyone. Thanks, everyone.
Bye-bye.